In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening and welcome to Older Women Likewise. We're so glad to have you with us this evening to see and to enjoy and to hopefully at home participate in the lesson that Cherri Armstrong is bringing us this evening. Cherri, we're so glad to have you with us, as well as Judy and Sandy. Those who are regular watchers and listeners know that they often come in for me and I say, come on, be on the program. I need you tonight. They say, okay, they're just really team players. So I really appreciate y'all being the class for Cherri. Cherri, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to be in the background doing some PowerPoint stuff. So I know you'll have a great study.
Well, thank you, Isla. I appreciate the opportunity of being here and presenting this lesson. It's just a simple lesson, but hopefully we can gain some ideas from it. And Judy and Sandy, thank you for being my guinea pigs, especially since we've never met before tonight. The lesson is, I call it Lessons from the Quilt, and I'm going to tell you a story about a specific quilt and draw some lessons from that. I want to start off with looking at, at least mentioning 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul describes our relationship with each other in the church as being members of the same body. And, you get the idea that everyone is important. But in Colossians 2, he also says that our hearts should be knit together in love. And I like that metaphor, especially, and that's kind of where we're heading tonight with my little story. Can y'all think of an example where it mentions individuals in the Bible where they were knit together?
Well, of course, there's David,
Right, David and Jonathan.
Jonathan, we know that,
Right.
I thought about Ruth and Naomi. It doesn't specifically say they were knit together, but surely she clung to her. She clung to Naomi.
That's right.
So to me, I think they felt like they were knit. At least Ruth certainly did feel that way.
I think that's an excellent point, Judy. I think so. And we're going to go back to the David and Jonathan example in a little bit, but that was the main one I thought of because it does specifically say that they were knit together.
Right.
Well, what do you picture from the word knit when you hear the word knit in conjunction with individuals? Sandy, you want to jump in on that one?
Well, I would say closely bonded together. I was telling you earlier about my grandmother taking my stitches out because they weren't closely sewn like hers were. So,
right.
That's the way I picture it. And something I saw on Facebook today that said broken things can become blessed things when you let God do the mending.
Oh, that's good.
I think about that with the knitting, when you let God knit yourself to others. And Judy and I come from a congregation in Iowa too, where, I just can't imagine more love in any congregation than what we have when somebody's hurting. we're all there. So I really feel like we're all knit together.
Well, that's good. And hopefully then you're going to be able to provide some good illustrations when we get to that point in the lesson.
You're up.
Okay. Well, I want to start off with telling you the story about this quilt. And you can see there, the first picture is just a picture of the quilt itself. This quilt was made when I was about 3 years old. And I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but you might happen to see the year stitched in there somewhere. But what happened, my father was preaching at a small country congregation, and the ladies at the congregation got together, made this quilt as a gift for us. I think some people called it a friendship quilt. We began calling it the tea quilt. The blocks, if you look at that third picture, you can see that the blocks are made up of T's, the letter T that are around each side. And that was for our last name, Thomas. So at home, we called it the tea quilt sometimes. And it was well used and abused and everything. You can see from the middle picture there, it's torn, it's coming apart. Some of the stuffing is out of it. We probably made tents and forts and everything else out of it. I was the youngest of 4, so it took some hard use. But it was special because it was made for the family. And then me being the last one at home, I got to take it with me when I left home, and it, went in the closet with the blankets and so forth. And it was used occasionally, but it was just a quilt. Well, one night when my daughter was about 5 years old, 5 or 6, she had a nightmare. Mm-hmm. And this one was one that just would not go away. I sat in her room with her, and I could not get her calmed down. And I don't know why I thought of it, but I was desperate. And I thought of this quilt. And so I got the quilt and I put it on her bed, and I told her the story of how it was made and how all these ladies loved our family so much. And I told her that they put so much love into this quilt when they made it, that when she was under it, that nothing could hurt her. Mm. And of course, she was old enough not to believe that, but she liked the idea of that. Mm-hmm. So from that point on, whenever, even up until she was grown and left the house, if she was feeling bad, if she was upset about something, we got out the love quilt. And that's what we started calling it, was the love quilt. Neat. And we still refer to it as that, although it doesn't get much use these days. It's packed up. It's falling apart. But that was our thing. That was the love quilt. So one night, much later, just a few years ago, after I had been widowed and I was in bed and I was just meditating about things, I thought of this quilt for some reason. And it suddenly dawned on me that this quilt was like the Lord's body, the church. I mean, I thought about it, and we should feel loved and secure and comforted when we're with our brothers and sisters. So I started taking that idea a little bit farther. So in my mind, I began looking at the pieces of the quilt. And if we can get the next slide up, yeah. The backing and the binding, as you can see there on the edge that I've got turned up, I thought, well, that is Jesus. He is our foundation, and our faith in him is what binds us into the church. And that is what is represented by the backing and the binding. And just in researching for this lesson, I ran across a place where in some circles, the top, before it's quilted and attached to the backing, is called a flimsy. And I thought, how appropriate. What would we be without Jesus? We would be pretty flimsy.
Yeah.
I just thought I would throw that one in because I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But to get back to my illustration here, the blocks, if you look at all these different blocks that were done, they are all different. Some of them are bold colors, some of them are muted colors, some of them are different patterns, florals or geometric, or they're all different, but they come together to form a beautiful quilt. And I kind of feel like that they represent the personalities of the ladies that made them. And another difference is that the quilters, and you wouldn't know this by looking, but I'd happen to know since I'm familiar with it, the quilters were a wide age range at the point they made this. There were several mother and daughter combinations in there. And I know that there's at least one instance, and possibly more, but one that I know of, where there's 3 generations of women who put a square into this top. And it was actually my best friend's mother and her older sister and her grandmother. So another difference was the skill level of the ladies that did this. And you can see some of them were able to do this beautiful script writing in stitches, which that's beyond me, but
Yeah.
you can see some of it just looks like writing. It's so beautiful. And some were just able to get their initials on there. You know, that's all they could manage. They had different skill levels. And there was even one quilter. If you look at this picture, you can see the brown quilt, the brown square on the top. The T's are in upside down. You see, the green T's are the way that the pattern was designed, but the brown ones are upside down. You know what? They included her anyway because she was one of them.
Yeah.
And we can just see all the difference, the differences that we have, but they don't stand in our way of having a relationship because we are all part of Christ. And I think it makes everything more meaningful because we do come from different backgrounds. It's more special because we come together for this reason. So in thinking about that, I thought, well, you know, the church is a gift from God, just like this quilt was a gift from our friends at church. So we've talked about the parts of the quilt, but there's another aspect that I want to delve into, and that's where I really want to spend most of the time. And that is that we're bound to each other. Each of those squares, those quilt blocks, are stitched to the one next to them. So what I want to explore is, you know, how do we make the stitches that hold us together as individuals? How do we develop those relationships that make us all feel loved and comforted and safe when we're together? Well, going back to our David and Jonathan example, I want to throw out the first stitch, if you will, of what I think brings us together. If we look at David and Jonathan, you know, it always kind of struck me as odd. You know, Jonathan laid eyes on David and suddenly he loved him, it says. But then I thought about it, and the first time we see Jonathan in 1 Samuel 14, he is with only his armor bearer, and they are going up against a garrison of the Philistines. And the reason it appears that he is able to do this is because he, in his mind, he says, well, the Lord can save by few or save by many. He knew that his strength was coming from the Lord. And so he and his armor bearer attacked this garrison, and I think they killed 20 or so, as I recall. So with that in mind, I think Jonathan is really an unsung hero of faith that we don't talk about enough. But with that in mind, then, that sounds to me like what David says when he goes up against Goliath. You recall, he says, I come with the armies of the Lord of hosts, in the name of the Lord of hosts. So that had just happened, and Jonathan, I think, saw David with the same kind of faith in God that he had. And I think that was the first stitch that bound them together. They had this similar faith in our all-powerful God. And so I think that's the starting point for our relationships with each other, is that we all have this faith, and we respect that in each other, and we understand that in each other. But there are some practical ways that we can actually improve our relationships and draw closer to each other. And that's what I want to look at next. And I hope y'all have brought some good ideas and some good stories or examples that we can look at that with. Judy, would you like to start for us?
Sure.
Some ideas?
Sure. Well, I went to Galatians 6 and 2 because of the church, okay? So it says that we are to bear one another's burdens.
Mm-hmm.
If I bear your burden, it most definitely, and if you bear mine, it most definitely is going to bring us closer together. I mean, because that's the innermost of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Our burden. We are carrying our burden. And
yes.
if we bear it, it helps relieve it. It helps. You're going to help carry it for me, you know? And I've had in my lifetime as a Christian, some women, it's usually women, tell me things that was heavy on their heart, and no one knew. And they told me these things, and of course asked me not to repeat them. But I really believe when one in particular, when it was off their chest, so to speak, it helped that person because they no longer felt like they were hindered, from carrying this that was something that they weren't proud of.
Yeah.
Okay. So bearing one another's burdens, I think, is a great way that we can help and be closer. It's definitely going to choose you to be closer together.
Yes, I agree. And that's good. Sandy, you have something you want to?
I do. I have more of a personal situation I want to share, but it goes right along with what Judy was saying. And everybody at our congregation is sick of hearing about this. But
Not really.
7 years ago, I had a liver transplant. And I was probably a week from dying at that point, according to the doctors. And I wasn't worried because I could feel the prayers and the strength from my brothers and sisters at our congregation and others all over the United States praying for me. And when they wheeled me out to the transplant that night, my family's all standing there with these long faces. And I'm just like, don't worry about it. God's got this. I've got all of these people. And I felt like every one of them was sitting right on that gurney with me.
Yeah.
And that strength is what pulled me through the most difficult thing I've ever been through in my life. So, you know, to me, this is just clinching it for me.
Well, that's good. That's good. And those are both good illustrations. There are also some other ways that we can draw closer, though. I mean, we've been talking about maybe sad things or, you know, uncomfortable things, but what about when we rejoice together?
Absolutely.
You know, there are good times that bring us together as well.
There were a lot of those after I got back to services, and even before. But
right,
we all had a lot of things to be thankful for, I think.
Well, you know what comes to my mind right away is a potluck.
Food.
Long potlucks.
You know, potlucks. I mean, they bring you together. They really do. You know, food does that. You know,
that's right.
I also thought about things. It's interesting because I've thought about this before about like making a quilt. You know, just like your quilt. With many of us, you know, I've done this before. People have done this with me. So, or I've done it with them. And so we each get a block, right, you know, and then each one of us puts our own personality into that block, right, you know, and then somebody puts it all together and whatever, you know, and, you know, and so we could be gathered together doing that. We could be gathered together for Bible studies. That brings you closer together. You know, there's just lots of things that I could think of. How the brethren in Moldova. I mean, we know people who go there and do work for the Lord, and it would be wonderful. Like it's always the women. Here we go, but you know, we get together and we create things or do things that need to be done for those people who have nothing, but we can help them, you know. But meantime, we are bringing ourselves closer because we're sitting around doing things together. Yes. And we're talking and we're sharing.
Right. We're serving together. We're working together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of interesting that you brought that up too. That was one of the things on my list. Was working together. And I actually was thinking about some Bible examples of these activities, so to speak. And for rejoicing, I thought of Mary and Elizabeth when they found out that, you know, Mary was expecting. For studying, I put Paul and everybody. Because I feel like he drew close to everybody, you know, because they were studying together and he was teaching them. But that's some good ideas. I had an example of, I guess you would call it working together or serving together. Some years ago at the congregation I was in, I moved about 3 years ago to be closer to my daughter after my husband died. So I had been at that congregation for 37 years, something like that. And that was difficult to take my square out of that quilt and put it into a new one. But I had some great ladies here at Vestavia that dragged me kicking and screaming into the quilt here. But while I was still there at Northwood, one day we lived not too far from the church building, and I was headed to church one Sunday night, and there was a van pulled over to the side of the road, and it was in a subdivision. It wasn't a main road. So I knew there was something, a little concerning. And as I kind of drove by it slowly, I saw that there was a young lady sitting there just crying her eyes out. I mean, just what we call squalling, And so I pulled over and I got out and I tried to talk to her, and I wasn't getting very far. And another car pulled up. It was another family that was going to church where I was. And their grown daughter was with them. She got out of the car, and between the two of us, we kind of convinced her to pull the van over into the parking lot of the church building. And the two of us got in there and spoke with her. And boy, God puts the right people in the right place at the right time. But that she had some issues. She had some small children. Her husband had left, and she was having to live with her parents. And one of the children had health issues. And, it was just kind of one of those more than she could bear days. But my young friend had some life circumstances that were similar to the young lady. And I, at the time, was taking care of my sick husband. So I could relate to the health issues and the problems that caused. So between the two of us, we kind of got her, in a better place. But we sat there the entire hour that worship was going on in the building. We both tried to encourage her to come back and worship with us. And as far as I know, that never happened. But my young friend and I made some stitches that night between us because we went through that together. And she later moved out of state, and I don't see her or talk to her very often, but I know that we still have that mutual respect for one another.
Yeah.
And I think that was an example of we were just thrown into the situation, and we were able to work together, and it drew us closer.
Yeah.
So that's another way that we draw closer. Now, when I did my ladies' Bible class here, we came up with a whole list of things. Sharing grief. I know after I lost my husband, there were a couple of other ladies that within the next year lost their husbands, and I was able to, I don't know that I helped as much, but just them knowing that I knew what they were going through was helpful to them.
Totally.
And there were, spending time as you go through different stages, there's going to be different ways, obviously, that this works. If you have small children and you get the children together to play, that brings you closer. You're sharing, mother problems and questions and ideas. And as you get older, then, maybe we're looking out for some of the widows that are by themselves or whatever. There's other ways to do that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I had on my list was worship. If we worship together, don't you think that brings us closer?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
How many times have we walked into the building when we're kind of down and not having a good day, and we thought, well, I dragged myself here, but, and you walk out and you're just walking on air because of all the encouragement that you had received and all the love you've received from the other people there. So
right.
I know it's happened for me many times.
Oh, me too. And you feel like, boy, I'm so glad I made the effort.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's definitely, you almost want to say a number one,
Yeah.
because,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, singing, hearing the word, just being with people, being with other Christians who love you. They love you.
Yes.
And you love them. So you've got that bond.
Confidence, yeah.
Yeah. And so that just makes you feel really good. God kind of knew what he was doing.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And if I don't know what your experience was during COVID, but we had to miss. I know where we were. We missed, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks before we could actually work out some situation where we could kind of sort of be together,
Right.
And I don't know, after going through that, I don't know how anybody can think that they don't need to be with their brethren to worship, because tears were streaming down everybody's face when we were able to get, even though we were having to sit far apart and there were not as many of us, but that first song, I can still tell you what that first song was that we sang together, and I'm sure y'all experienced that. Did y'all, you want to comment on that at all? How
well, we still do to a point, because there are many Sunday mornings that I can't make it to services, and we live stream now, and it makes me feel connected, but not like sitting there singing with everybody else and just feeling like your hearts are knit together.
Yes,
because there is a difference. I'm appreciative of live stream for those days when I can't make it, but boy, there is nothing like being there in person.
I guess that would be like looking at the quilt and not being under it.
Exactly.
That's perfect. Yeah.
You understand it and you're glad to see it. You're a part of it, but you're not enveloped in it like you are in the congregation.
Right.
Yeah. When you were talking back, I'm kind of going back a little.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. We're just discussing now.
Okay, good. When we were talking about knitting, and what was the question? What do you picture from the word knit? Well, I happen to knit and crochet, so this hit kind of home with me so that I could think on that. And when we knit or crochet, you have yarn, and this could be people's, and you might have different colors, or maybe not, but you're going to by itself, this yarn, it's just a ball of yarn.
Mm-hmm.
But when you take this ball of yarn and all the other balls of yarn that you're going to need to make your garment, and you put that together and you knit it, you come up with a very strong garment.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay. The church.
Right.
Okay. So you're knitting. So the people are being knit together and the church is growing strong. If when you're knitting, you drop a stitch and you don't go back and fix that, your whole garment gets taken out. It just unravels.
Wow.
Because you didn't fix that.
Yeah.
So it's real important with the church. And if there's anything that we see that needs fixing, we need to really fix it. And mostly in ourselves.
Yes. Yes. We need to start with ourselves for sure.
Right. Right. But I thought, well, that's kind of what, you could relate that.
Right.
Your garment is not going to work properly if you don't fix that stitch. So even if you try to go ahead and forget about it, it's not going to serve the purpose that it was meant to serve. Right. It's the same as the church.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, along with worship, I think sometimes just, especially if there's a particular situation going on, just getting together to pray about a situation. Yeah. I don't think we do that as much as we should, probably.
Yeah, not like in the olden days.
Right. I'm sure people got together and prayed, before your surgery.
Oh, yeah.
And that was part of what you felt.
Exactly.
But, that brings us together, not just for you, who was the recipient of the prayer, but for all the people participating, because they were joining in with something that they all felt strongly about.
A common purpose.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it's a privilege for us to be able to pray for each other.
Yes, it is.
It's not, like you see on Facebook, somebody asks for prayers. And I think anytime anybody, Christian or no, if they ask for prayers, it's our duty to pray for them. And when you see that, you know that person's going to feel the strength that you're putting into your prayers. And it's not something we should just lightly flip off and say, oh, well, I'll pray for them later or whatever. I know a lady we had on here one night said that if somebody said, well, at 8:00 tonight, I'm having this test in college and it's really hard and I'm very concerned about it. She set her watch at 8:00 to pray for that lady. And it really made a big impression on me that somebody would be that specific, I guess, about a prayer. So
yeah.
I try when someone asks for prayers, I try and stop at that moment, because a lot of times you see it on Facebook. Please pray for me. I'm doing this, or I need this, or whatever. And like I when I hit, I will pray for you, or the praying hands, I think to myself, okay, you're going to forget.
Yeah,
exactly. Stop right now.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, kind of stop.
There's nothing more important at that moment than what you promised to do.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And if you're going to forget or you can't do it, don't say you will.
That's right. Exactly. And if somebody asks you to pray, how can you say no? They know you're a Christian, or even if they don't know you're a Christian, if they ask you to pray, then I think you have a responsibility to pray for that person. And a privilege.
Right. Well, kind of back to our main focus of how we strengthen these relationships. What do you think? I think spending time together is one of the main things, don't you?
Yeah. And I think that's something that we've neglected in a lot of congregations, especially since COVID.
Yes.
I know we used to have potlucks at least every quarter. And I think we've had one or two in the last couple of years. So, it's just, we need to get back to some of those things because it's too easy to let things go. Judy. He's the one that always sets up the potlucks.
I see.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Well, we all just get so busy. And
it's true.
But
it's not that we don't have the desire to do the right thing.
Exactly.
We just, life gets in the way.
Yes.
And so, we need to stop letting that part of our life take over the better part of our life. So.
Yes. One more example about worship from my personal experience, kind of similar to COVID, before COVID happened. I was taking care of my husband, who was bedfast for 9 years. And there were, most of the time I could make it on Sunday morning, but I eventually gave up trying to make it Wednesday night, Sunday night. It was just more than I could do. And it got to the point where on Saturday night, I just prayed that nothing would happen during the night, or that he wouldn't have any problems that would prevent me from getting to worship the next day, because it was so important and it was so strengthening to me. And so I kind of had that COVID experience before COVID, if you see what I mean. But it is so important. It is so important.
It is. Sometimes I just pray for the strength to be able to get up and do everything I need to do to get ready to get there.
Yes.
Because there are some days that is major hard for me to do. But Sunday morning I got sick in services, and we ended up leaving right after church. And I came home, went to bed, and stayed there until 4:15, and we started at 5.
Yeah.
And it was sing night. So, and I'm not saying this to make something that I did great, but you were talking about singing earlier and how it brings you together. I was so glad that I got out of that bed and made the effort to get there.
Wow.
And, and like I said, it's not just me. A lot of people are in that situation. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not so easy. But because we're knit together, it feels like if one person is not there, it just doesn't fit as well as it should. It does not as strong as it should be.
And sometimes we don't appreciate those things until we don't have them for a while.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, back to the praying for each other, I had another thought, and that is, don't you think it's important if you are praying for somebody, not particularly somebody that's asked you for prayer, but you just know somebody that's in a situation, don't you think it's important to tell them that you're praying for them so that they can get that comfort as well? I mean, the prayer is going to work either way, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to let them know that you're praying for them.
We have a lady at church that tells me every time she sees me almost that she prays for me every night. And every time she tells me that, it just uplifts me to know that she thinks that much of, praying for me. So
yeah, we had some friends at Northwood that would tell me the same thing when Jeff was in such bad shape, but she prayed for us all the time.
That's a big encouragement. Yeah,
it does mean a lot.
It does.
And I think Sandy made this point before: Christian or not a Christian. Okay, so today my grandson, who's a Marine, went. He was put on a ship today for the Mediterranean, and he's not a Christian. He believes in God. So first thing I did on his phone, is say to him, "You're in my prayers," and for whatever good it is, he knows that. He knows Grandma's praying.
Yeah.
So, it non-Christian or Christian, we need to pray. We need to pray for everyone.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any other ideas that we want to share before I move on to my final point here?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. You didn't allude to it. You outright said it with Paul. We taught so many people, but if you teach somebody the gospel, or even if you're instrumental in it, and you lead them to Christ, there is no greater high in this world than knowing that you help that soul to find God. And, that I wish we had a lot more children in our congregation, because they're so open to the gospel at certain ages.
Yes.
And so many of them we taught back in the day, some of them have gone on to be Christians and some of them have fallen away. But we still need to keep those people in our prayers, and no matter who they are, if you help teach them, you're happy when anybody's baptized. But when it's somebody you've had a part of, it's really great. So we need to make sure we're doing more of it.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Well, the final point that I wanted to make to kind of wrap this up is, the result of these relationships that we have, it doesn't just benefit us. We're really kind of evangelizing when the world sees those relationships. And if we could read John 17:21, basically the thought is that that they may be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me.
Right.
Amen.
So I think sometimes we don't think about that. That
Yeah.
if we're if we're out with our Christian friends, or we're talking about our Christian friends to non-Christians, and we're discussing the things that we've done for each other, or somebody's done for us, or whatever, that's actually evangelizing. That is hopefully making them want what we have.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's a good way to kind of end this on that note. Do y'all have any final thoughts or questions or ideas before I close this out?
Just thank you for your lesson.
Thank
It
you.
really was. It was great.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your participation, because I couldn't have done it without you. So, well, I want to thank everybody for participating, for listening, and let's just go out and make some stitches with each other. How about that?
Sounds like a good idea.
All right.
Good.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.